The courtroom was dead silent, so silent you could hear the ticking of the judge's wristwatch. Judge Malcolm Hayes, a man known for his sharp tongue and dismissive attitude, leaned back in his chair, a smug grin tugging at the corner of his lips. His laughter had just echoed through the courtroom like a cannon blast, bouncing off the mahogany walls and settling like an invisible weight on everyone's shoulders. He was laughing at her. A woman stood in the center of the courtroom, her face unreadable, her hands steady. She had been standing tall, confident, and unshaken, but the judge's laughter had changed the energy in the room. It wasn't just laughter, it was mockery. A loud, booming, condescending mockery. The moment stretched, every eye darting between the two figures. The woman didn't flinch. Instead, she reached into her blazer with calm, practiced movements, her fingers finding the smooth leather of her badge holder. She flipped it open. The moment Judge Hayes' eyes fell on the badge, the color drained from his face. His breath hitched. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His smug expression collapsed into one of sheer, frozen horror. United States Secret Service. Silence swallowed the courtroom whole. The judge didn't move. He didn't blink. He just sat there, frozen, as if someone had pressed pause on his life. And then, without a word, the woman tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into the smallest, knowing smile. Everything had just changed. A few weeks earlier, Sarah Carter stepped into the grocery store, adjusting the strap of her purse over her shoulder. She was dressed casually, jeans, sneakers, a plain blue t-shirt, but she still had an air of quiet confidence about her. It was a warm afternoon in Washington, D.C., and Sarah had just wrapped up an exhausting week. As a senior agent in the U.S. Secret Service, she was used to high-pressure situations, protecting important figures, uncovering threats, handling crises. Those were all part of the job. But today, she was just another woman grabbing a carton of milk. At least, that's what she thought. She had barely turned into the dairy aisle when she heard a commotion near the checkout lanes. A young woman, no older than 20, was arguing with an older man in a suit. "I told you," the young woman pleaded. "I didn't steal anything. Please, check the cameras." The man scoffed. "I don't need to check the cameras. I saw you pocket something." Sarah slowed her steps. Something wasn't right. The young woman's hands were shaking, her eyes darting around the store as if looking for help. She was dressed in old, worn-out clothes, her sneakers barely holding together. But her face didn't carry the expression of a thief. It carried fear. The manager arrived, a short, stocky man with a permanent scowl. "What's going on?" he demanded. "This girl stole from the store," the suited man declared. "I saw her take something and put it in her hoodie pocket." The manager crossed his arms and nodded. "All right, let's see what she took. Empty your pockets." The girl hesitated. "See," the man sneered. "She won't do it because she's guilty." Sarah sighed. She had seen enough. She stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Maybe she's hesitating because she's scared, not because she's guilty." The man turned sharply. "And who do you think you are?" Sarah's smile was polite, but there was steel beneath it. "Someone who knows a thing or two about justice." The girl glanced at Sarah, hope flickering in her eyes. Sarah gestured gently. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Show them what's in your pockets." Tears welled up in the young woman's eyes as she reached into her hoodie and pulled out a small, unopened bottle of baby formula. The entire store fell silent. The manager's expression softened for just a second before hardening again. "Stealing is stealing," he grumbled. The suited man smirked. "Told you." Sarah clenched her jaw. The girl wasn't a thief. She was desperate. "What's your name?" Sarah asked softly. The girl sniffled. "Emma." Sarah nodded. "Emma, do you have a baby?" Emma nodded quickly, swiping at her tears. "My little brother. He's only 8 months old. We ran out of formula yesterday, and my mom lost her job last week. She's been trying, but—" She choked on her words. Sarah turned to the manager. "How much is the formula?" $18.99, he muttered. Sarah reached into her wallet, pulled out a 20, and placed it on the counter. "Here," she said. "Problem solved." The manager hesitated before nodding. He took the money and handed the bottle back to Emma, who clutched it like a lifeline. The suited man, however, wasn't done. That's not the point, he scoffed. People like her think they can just take whatever they want. People like her? Sarah interrupted, her voice ice cold. The man faltered. I didn't mean. You did, Sarah said. You absolutely did. His mouth snapped shut. Emma looked up at Sarah, her voice barely a whisper. Thank you. Sarah offered her a reassuring smile. Take care of your brother, okay? Emma nodded, still clutching the formula like it was the most valuable thing in the world. As Sarah turned to leave, she caught the suited man glaring at her, his face burning with irritation. She didn't know it then, but that moment, that tiny, insignificant moment, was the first domino in a series of events that would eventually land her in a courtroom, standing before a laughing judge. She didn't know it yet, but the storm was coming. 2 weeks later, Sarah walked through the heavy doors of the courthouse, dressed in a sharp navy suit. She had been called in as a witness for a case she knew very little about. It wasn't until she stepped inside that she saw him, the suited man from the grocery store. His smug smile widened when he saw her, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Sarah's gut twisted. Something was very, very wrong. The courtroom doors swung shut behind her, and the storm finally arrived. Sarah took her seat near the witness stand, her eyes locked on the man she had encountered at the grocery store. His smug expression made her stomach twist, but she kept her face blank. She had no idea why she had been called here. The subpoena had been vague, just an order to appear in court as a witness. No details, no explanation. But now, seeing him, Sarah knew this was no coincidence. The judge entered, and the courtroom rose to its feet. Judge Malcolm Hayes, known for his no-nonsense demeanor and a reputation for being particularly harsh on defendants, took his seat. Be seated, he said, his voice carrying through the silent room. Sarah sat, her instincts on high alert. The prosecutor, a thin man with sharp glasses, stood. Your Honor, the case before you is State versus Emma Caldwell, charged with misdemeanor theft. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Emma? She turned sharply, and there, sitting at the defendant's table, was Emma. The girl's shoulders were hunched, her hands clenched in her lap. Her eyes, once filled with fear at the grocery store, now held something else, defeat. Sarah's jaw clenched. The suited man, now identified as Robert Langley, took the witness stand. He straightened his tie and flashed a smug smile before speaking. 2 weeks ago, I caught the defendant stealing from a local grocery store, Langley said smoothly. She attempted to take a bottle of baby formula without paying. Sarah's fists clenched under the table. He was twisting the story. The prosecutor nodded. And did she attempt to leave the store without paying? Yes, Langley lied effortlessly. She was confronted at the register and refused to hand over the item until forced. Sarah couldn't stay silent. That's not what happened, she said, her voice steady but firm. The judge's eyes snapped to her. You'll have your turn to speak, Ms. He glanced down at the papers. Carter. Until then, I suggest you remain silent. Langley smirked. Sarah sat back, keeping her expression unreadable. The prosecutor continued. Mr. Langley, in your opinion, does the defendant show any remorse for her actions? Langley sighed dramatically. No, Your Honor. She has made no effort to apologize. People like her. There it was again. People like her. Sarah exhaled slowly, keeping her rage in check. Langley went on. If we let this kind of behavior go unpunished, what message does that send? Stealing is stealing, no matter the reason. Judge Hayes nodded approvingly. I quite agree. Sarah's stomach dropped. Langley's testimony ended, and then the judge turned his gaze toward her. Ms. Carter, you were also present at the time of the incident. Please come forward. Sarah stood and walked to the witness stand, her movements slow, controlled. She took a deep breath as she was sworn in, then turned to face the courtroom. The prosecutor approached. Ms. Carter, please state your occupation for the court. Sarah kept her tone neutral. I work in federal law enforcement. Interesting, the prosecutor said, raising an eyebrow. And what exactly did you witness that day? Sarah met his gaze head-on. I witnessed a young woman being wrongly accused, A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Langley's smirk faltered. Sarah continued. Emma didn't try to steal. She hesitated when asked to empty her pockets because she was embarrassed, not guilty. She was holding on to baby formula for her brother. That was all. Judge Hayes exhaled loudly. Ms. Carter, while I appreciate your perspective, the fact remains that the defendant attempted to leave the store with unpaid merchandise. Sarah felt a storm brewing in her chest. The prosecutor folded his arms. Ms. Carter, you seem awfully invested in this case. I believe in justice, Sarah replied simply. Langley let out a dry laugh. Justice? You're defending a thief. What does that say about you? Sarah turned her head slowly toward him. The judge smirked. That's an excellent question, Mr. Langley. Ms. Carter, what exactly qualifies you to question this court's decision? Sarah didn't blink. Instead, she reached into her blazer. The room went still. With slow, practiced precision, she pulled out her badge and flipped it open. The courtroom froze. Judge Hayes' smirk vanished. Langley's face turned ghost white. The courtroom, moments ago filled with confidence and self-righteous laughter, was now drowning in stunned silence. The badge gleamed under the courtroom lights. United States Secret Service. Sarah tilted her head ever so slightly. Now, she said coolly, would you like to repeat that question? Judge Hayes didn't move. Langley didn't breathe. The entire courtroom held its breath. Sarah remained still, waiting for the moment everything changed. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Hayes' fingers twitched against the armrest of his chair, but he didn't speak. The color had drained from his face, as if someone had ripped the air from his lungs. Langley's mouth opened, then shut, his face twisting into something between fear and disbelief. Sarah didn't move. She didn't have to. The weight of her badge did all the talking. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm but carried a dangerous edge. You were saying, Your Honor? Judge Hayes finally blinked, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. The once mocking tone in his voice was gone, replaced by hesitation. I was simply asking, he stammered, why you seem so invested in this case, Miss Carter. Sarah held his gaze. Because justice is not about who has power, she said, her tone unwavering. It's about doing what's right. And what's happening here is not right. The entire room sat frozen, every eye darting between Sarah, Judge Hayes, and Langley. Emma, the young girl at the defendant's table, was staring at Sarah with something close to awe. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Your Honor, I request a brief recess. Judge Hayes was still staring at the badge as if it might come alive and bite him. He hesitated before nodding. Granted. 10 minutes. He banged the gavel, his movements stiff, and practically fled from the bench. Langley followed, his steps a little too hurried, as if he needed to escape. Sarah exhaled slowly, her heart steady, her face unreadable. She turned toward Emma, who was still sitting in shock. You okay? She asked softly. Emma nodded shakily. You're a federal agent? Sarah smiled slightly. That's what they tell me. Emma let out a breath of disbelief. I thought you were just, she hesitated, just someone who wanted to help. Sarah's smile widened, but there was something serious in her eyes. You don't have to be a federal agent to stand up for what's right, Emma. The girl's lip trembled slightly, but she nodded. Sarah turned, glancing toward the doors where Judge Hayes and Langley had disappeared. She could already tell what was happening behind those closed doors. They were scrambling, recalculating, trying to figure out how badly they had miscalculated. Sarah had seen it before, the moment bullies realized they had picked the wrong fight. She glanced down at the defense table, where Emma sat with her court-appointed attorney, a nervous-looking young man who had barely spoken during the proceedings. He was still gaping at Sarah's badge. Sarah leaned slightly toward him. You need to push for case dismissal, she murmured. He snapped out of his daze. You think they'll go for that? Sarah's gaze flickered toward the door. They don't have a choice. The attorney hesitated before nodding. I'll try. Sarah sat back, folding her hands in her lap as the courtroom murmured around her. The storm wasn't over yet, but the tide had just turned. The 10-minute recess stretched to 20, then 30. By the time Judge Hayes finally returned, His face was carefully neutral, but Sarah could see the tension in his posture. Langley returned as well, but his smugness had been stripped away. He looked rattled. Sarah watched them carefully, waiting. Judge Hayes cleared his throat. "Before we proceed, I have reviewed the circumstances of this case," he said, his voice measured. "Based on new considerations, the court finds that this matter does not warrant further prosecution." Sarah's lips twitched. "There it is." Emma stiffened in her chair. "Does that mean?" The judge let out a slow breath. "The case is dismissed." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Emma's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Sarah, though unsurprised, let relief wash over her. Langley's face was a storm of barely restrained rage, but he didn't dare speak. "Not now." Judge Hayes cleared his throat again. "Miss Caldwell, you are free to go." Emma turned to Sarah, her lips trembling, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Sarah gave her a small nod. But the moment wasn't over yet. She turned her head ever so slightly, locking eyes with Langley. "Remember what I told you," she said quietly. Langley's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Sarah stood, adjusting her blazer, and walked toward the exit. The weight of the courtroom still lingered in the air, but as she stepped outside, a breath of fresh air filled her lungs. She had done what she came to do. She had made sure justice was served. But she had the feeling this wasn't the last time she'd see Robert Langley. Not by a long shot. Sarah stepped outside the courthouse, inhaling deeply as the crisp air filled her lungs. The tension of the past hour still clung to her, but the moment she saw Emma step out behind her, looking lost yet relieved, she knew it had all been worth it. Emma clutched the straps of her backpack, glancing around as if unsure of where to go next. "You have a way home?" Sarah asked, keeping her tone casual. Emma hesitated. My mom's working a shift at the diner. I was just gonna walk." Sarah glanced at her watch. "How far?" "About an hour," Emma admitted. Sarah nodded toward her car. "Come on. I'll drop you off." Emma's eyes widened. "You don't have to." "I know." Sarah gave her a small smile. "But I want to." Emma hesitated before nodding. "Okay." The ride was quiet at first, the radio playing low in the background. Emma stared out the window, her fingers tapping against her knee. "You okay?" Sarah asked. Emma exhaled. "I still can't believe that just happened. I thought for sure I was going to end up with some kind of record." "Not on my watch," Sarah said firmly. "You didn't deserve that." Emma looked down at her lap. "You barely know me. Why did you help?" Sarah gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. "Because I've been where you are." Emma turned to her, surprised. "You have?" Sarah nodded, eyes focused on the road. "I wasn't born into money, Emma. My mom worked 2 jobs just to keep us fed. I've seen what happens when the world assumes the worst of you just because you don't have enough. And I've also seen what happens when no one steps in to help." Emma absorbed that, sitting in silence for a moment. Then she said softly, "I really thought no one cared." Sarah glanced at her. "Some people don't. But a lot of us do. You just have to find the right ones." Emma's eyes glistened, but she quickly wiped at them. They pulled up in front of a small diner, the neon sign flickering slightly. "Your mom in there?" Sarah asked. Emma nodded. "Yeah. She's on a double shift." Sarah reached into her pocket, pulling out a folded bill. Emma immediately shook her head. "No, I can't." Sarah pressed the $20 bill into her hand. "It's not charity, Emma. It's just a little help." Emma hesitated, then held the money close. "Thank you." Sarah gave her a small nod. "Take care of yourself, okay?" Emma nodded, then slipped out of the car, disappearing into the diner. Sarah watched her go, a small weight lifting from her chest. But just as she was about to drive off, her phone buzzed. She checked the caller ID. Unknown number. Her gut tensed. She answered. "Carter." A deep, unfamiliar voice came through the line. "You just made a powerful enemy." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" A chuckle. "Let's just say, you should have let this one go." Then the line went dead. Sarah stared at the phone, her pulse steady but her mind racing. Her instincts screamed that this wasn't random. This wasn't just about Emma. This was about power. and she had just stepped on the wrong toes. Sarah took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. If they thought she was going to back down, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Sarah sat in her car, gripping her phone, her pulse steady but her mind running a mile a minute. The voice on the phone, whoever it was, hadn't sounded like some random thug. No, there was something controlled about it, calculated. Someone was sending a message, and she had a strong suspicion about who it was. She dialed a number she hadn't used in a while. It rang twice before a gruff voice answered. Agent Carter, to what do I owe the honor? Sarah leaned back in her seat, scanning her surroundings out of habit. I need a trace on a call. Unknown number. Just came in about a minute ago. A pause. Then, you in trouble? Not yet, she said. But someone wants me to be. I'll see what I can do. I'll text you when I have something. Appreciate it. She hung up and stared at her phone. The courthouse. Judge Hayes. Robert Langley. It all led back to that moment, the second she had flashed her badge. She had humiliated them in a public courtroom. A judge and a well-connected businessman. If they were corrupt, which she strongly suspected, then she had just placed a very large target on her back. Sarah exhaled through her nose. Let them come. She turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from the diner, but her instincts told her she wasn't alone. A subtle flicker of headlights in her rearview mirror caught her attention. A black SUV. She made a left turn. So did they. Another turn. They followed. Sarah's lips curled slightly. Amateurs. She pressed a little harder on the gas, weaving through side streets, then suddenly made a sharp right turn into an alley. She killed the lights and the engine, gripping the steering wheel as the SUV sped past, clearly not expecting the move. Rookie mistake. Sarah counted to 5, then smoothly restarted the car and pulled back onto the road. Whoever they weren't just warning her. They were watching her. Sarah's apartment was in a secure building, but she still did a full sweep before stepping inside. She checked the locks, the windows, the hall. Everything was clear. Only then did she set her phone on the table and exhale. A message pinged. Number traced. Burner phone. Call originated from downtown, 2 blocks from the courthouse. No name attached. Sarah's jaw tightened. They're close. She had rattled them, and they wanted to rattle her back. She rolled her shoulders and headed to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. Her brain was already breaking it down. Judge Hayes. Corrupt? Maybe. Langley? Definitely. She had embarrassed him. But was he really powerful enough to pull something like this? Or was someone bigger pulling the strings? She set the glass down and grabbed her laptop. It was time to dig. A few keystrokes, and she was in. Robert Langley's records. Public image. Successful businessman. Deals in real estate. No criminal record. But Sarah wasn't interested in what was on the surface. She went deeper. Bank transactions. Properties. Political connections. Then she found it. A shell company. One that had wired money to Judge Hayes' campaign 3 years ago. Sarah leaned back in her chair. Gotcha. So that's how the game was played. Langley wasn't just some arrogant suit. He was someone who owned people. Judges. Officials. Maybe more. And now she had a thread to pull. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard when suddenly, a noise. A scrape against her window. Her hand moved instinctively, reaching for the gun in her side drawer. She flicked off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Then she listened. Another noise. Someone was out there. And they weren't just watching this time. Sarah's grip tightened on the gun. The night had just taken a very dangerous turn. Sarah's heartbeat remained steady as she moved with practiced precision, her fingers tightening around the grip of her Glock. She stayed low, moving toward the window without making a sound. Another scrape. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to be stealthy. They wanted her to know. She pressed herself against the wall, inhaled slowly, then flicked open the blinds, fast. Nothing. The street below was quiet. No movement. No car engines running. Sarah's eyes narrowed. They're playing games. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted it. A small, unmarked envelope wedged into the side of her window frame. They were close enough to leave that there. Her jaw tightened. She flicked the safety on her gun, reached out, and plucked the envelope free. It was standard, cheap, no address, No name. She opened it. Inside was a single folded piece of paper. Walk away. That was it. 2 words, typed in bold capital letters. No signature. Sarah stared at the message, then let out a slow exhale. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed a matchbox, and with one quick flick, set the note on fire. The flames curled the edges as she dropped it into the sink and watched it burn. I don't scare easy. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number of the one person who wouldn't ask too many questions. Agent Carter. The voice on the other end said, "It's late. What's wrong?" "Need a favor, Jake," Sarah said, still watching the last of the ashes disappear. A sigh. "You're in trouble again, aren't you?" "Nothing I can't handle," she said. "But I need a background check on Judge Hayes and Robert Langley." Deep. Off the books deep. A pause. Then, "You're stirring up something nasty, aren't you?" Sarah smirked. "Isn't that what I do best?" Another sigh. "Fine. I'll send you what I find by morning. But be careful, Sarah. You're poking at people who don't like being poked." "Noted," she said. She hung up, her mind already working through the next steps. Someone wanted her to back off, which meant she was getting close to something important. And that was exactly why she wasn't stopping. The next morning, Sarah was up before dawn, sipping black coffee and going through the files Jake had sent over. What she found only confirmed what she already suspected. Judge Hayes wasn't just biased, he was bought. His record showed a pattern of ruling favorably in cases that benefited wealthy businessmen, including Langley. Some of the connections were subtle, buried under legal jargon and donations that looked clean on paper. But Sarah knew better. And then there was Langley. On the surface, he was just another businessman. But underneath? Shell companies, offshore accounts, land deals that led to people being displaced, forced out of their homes. And worst of all, a string of missing persons linked to projects Langley had stakes in. Sarah sat back, staring at the screen. This isn't just corruption. It's something worse. Langley had money, power, and influence. But she had something he didn't. The truth. And now she just had to figure out what to do with it. She closed the laptop and rubbed her temples. She needed to be smart. Langley and Hayes weren't just going to roll over because she had dirt on them. She needed evidence. Solid, undeniable proof. And she had a feeling she knew exactly where to start. She grabbed her keys. It was time to pay Robert Langley a visit. But what Sarah didn't know was that Langley already knew she was coming. And he was ready for her. Sarah drove with purpose, her eyes flicking between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. No sign of a tail this time. If they were watching, they were getting smarter about it. She had Langley's office address. A sleek, high-rise in the heart of downtown. He operated out of the top floor, of course, because people like him always did. Sarah pulled into the underground parking garage, scanning for any obvious threats. Nothing. She parked near the elevator, turned off the engine, and took a deep breath. This was a risk. Walking into Langley's territory wasn't exactly playing it safe. But Sarah never played safe. She stepped out, adjusting her blazer, and headed inside. The lobby was exactly what she expected. Expensive, soulless, black marble floors, gold accents, a giant chandelier that screamed, "Look how much money I have." A receptionist sat behind a curved desk, her nails clicking against the keyboard as she barely glanced up. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked in a bored voice. Sarah smiled. "Tell Mr. Langley that Sarah Carter is here to see him." The woman frowned. "I don't see your name on the schedule." "You will in about 10 seconds, Sarah said. The receptionist hesitated, but picked up the phone. She muttered something into the receiver, then listened. Her eyes flickered with surprise. "He'll see you," she said. Hanging up, Sarah smirked. "Yeah, I bet he will." The elevator doors slid open, and Sarah stepped onto the top floor. Langley's office was at the end of a long, glass-walled hallway. He had made sure that every step toward him was visible. A power move. Sarah walked it like she owned the place. When she reached the door, it was already open. Langley was sitting behind a massive desk, fingers steepled, a smug grin on his face. "I was wondering how long it would take before you came knocking," he said. Sarah shut the door behind her and didn't sit. "You sent someone to my apartment last night?" Langley's smirk widened. "Did I?" She folded her arms. I don't like games, Langley. He leaned back. Oh, but I think you do. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. Sarah's jaw clenched. I know about the payments. The shell companies. The missing people linked to your projects. Langley didn't even blink. That sounds like a lot of wild accusations, Agent Carter. You don't seem very nervous. Why would I be? He tilted his head. You think you're the first person to come at me? You think you're special? Sarah didn't respond. Langley's smile faded. Let me give you a little reality check, Agent. People like me don't lose. And people like you? They either fall in line or they disappear. Sarah's eyes didn't waver. Is that a threat? Langley sighed, almost lazily. It's a choice. She stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she pulled out her phone and set it on his desk. She hit play. The recording started. People like me don't lose. And people like you? They either fall in line or they disappear. Langley's expression barely changed, but his eyes darkened. Sarah picked up her phone. That's the thing about people like me, Langley. We come prepared. For the first time, Langley looked slightly irritated. What do you think you're going to do with that? Run to the authorities? You think I don't own half of them? Sarah smiled coldly. Oh, I'm not taking it to them. I'm taking it to the people you can't buy. Langley's jaw tightened. You have no idea what you're stepping into. Sarah pocketed her phone. I know exactly what I'm stepping into. The question is, how deep are you willing to sink to stop me? Langley exhaled through his nose, then gave her a look that sent a warning straight down her spine. This isn't over, he said quietly. Sarah turned for the door. No, it isn't. She stepped out into the hallway, her mind already running through her next move. But as she reached the elevator, her phone buzzed. A message, one that sent ice straight through her veins. It was a picture of Emma, taken just minutes ago, and underneath it, 3 words. Time's up, Agent. Sarah's breath hitched, but only for a fraction of a second. They took Emma. Her fingers tightened around the phone as she stared at the message. Stay calm. She turned and walked briskly to the elevator, her face unreadable. Langley was watching, and she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her panic. The moment she was inside and the doors slid shut, she moved fast. She hit speed dial. The call rang twice before Jake picked up. Carter, what's wrong? Emma's been taken. A sharp inhale. When? Minutes ago. They sent me a picture. Who? Langley. A curse on the other end. You need backup? I need a trace on this picture. Where it was sent from. On it. Sarah's pulse was steady, but her mind was on fire. Emma. She was just a kid. This wasn't supposed to touch her. Sarah clenched her jaw. Langley just made this personal. By the time Sarah reached her car, Jake had sent her a location. An abandoned warehouse. Just outside the city. Of course. She tossed her phone onto the passenger seat, started the engine, and peeled out of the parking garage. Her mind raced. Langley was smart. He wouldn't get his hands dirty. Someone else would be waiting for her at that warehouse. Which meant she had to be ready. She drove fast, weaving through traffic, her pulse steady. And then, something clicked. They had let her find out. Langley wanted her to come. She exhaled through her nose. Fine. Let's play. The warehouse loomed in the distance, surrounded by cracked pavement and rusted fences. The kind of place where things happened in the dark and no one asked questions. Sarah killed the engine a block away and stepped out. She moved quietly, her gun drawn but low, her steps careful. The front door was ajar. Too easy. She slipped inside. The air was stale, thick with dust and oil. Faint light filtered through broken windows, casting jagged shadows across the floor. Then she heard it. A muffled sound. Sarah's heart clenched. Emma. She followed the sound, rounding a corner, and stopped. Emma was there, tied to a chair. Her eyes were wide with fear. And behind her, a man Sarah didn't recognize. Tall, built like a boxer, scar across his jaw. He was holding a gun, pointed straight at Emma's head. Sarah's pulse remained steady. You must be Carter, the man said, smirking. Sarah tilted her head. And you must be the errand boy. His smirk faded. I don't take orders. Then why are you doing Langley's dirty work? He scoffed. You're not in a position to talk, Agent. You walked right into this. Sarah's grip on her gun tightened. Then let's cut the act. What does Langley want? The man chuckled. Simple. You walk away. You forget about the case. You disappear. Sarah didn't blink. And if I don't? The man pressed the gun harder against Emma's temple. Sarah's jaw clenched. She could take him. She knew that. But one wrong move, and Emma was gone. She exhaled slowly. All right, she said, lowering her gun just slightly. The man's smirk returned. Smart. Then Sarah moved. Fast. Her free hand grabbed a loose metal pipe from the floor, and with one swift motion, she swung. It slammed against his wrist. His gun fired, but not at Emma. The bullet ricocheted into the ceiling as he stumbled back, cursing. Sarah was on him before he could recover. A sharp elbow to the ribs. A swift kick to the knee. The man dropped. His gun slid across the floor. Sarah kicked it away. The man groaned, clutching his side. You. She cut him off with a punch that sent him sprawling. Then she turned to Emma. Hold still, she murmured, quickly untying her. Emma's hands were shaking. Are you okay? Sarah asked. Emma nodded quickly, her breath shaky. Sarah touched her shoulder. We're getting out of here. But before they could move, a voice rang out. Not so fast. Sarah turned. Another man. Gun raised. The game wasn't over yet. Sarah's body tensed, her instinct screaming as she shifted slightly to position herself between Emma and the new threat. The man standing in the doorway was different from the first. He wasn't just muscle. There was something colder about him. Calculated. A professional. He held the gun steady, aimed directly at Sarah's chest. You put up more of a fight than I expected, he said smoothly. Langley said you'd be stubborn. I told him that was an understatement. Sarah's grip on Emma's wrist tightened slightly, reassuring her. And you are? The man smirked. Does it matter? Sarah's eyes flicked to the unconscious thug on the ground, then back to him. You're here to clean up his mess. Something like that. Sarah's mind worked fast. He had her at gunpoint. Emma was behind her. No cover, no escape route. She needed to create an opening. She took a slow breath, keeping her voice calm. Langley must be getting desperate if he's sending someone like you. The man chuckled. Oh, Langley's not desperate. He's careful. He knew you wouldn't stop, so he made sure I was here to fix that problem. Sarah kept her hands loose at her sides, subtly shifting her weight onto the balls of her feet. And let me guess, you make people disappear? His smirk widened. Exactly. Sarah nodded. Good to know. And then she moved. In a split second, she shoved Emma hard to the ground, rolling as the first gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet missed by inches, shattering a crate behind her. Sarah hit the ground, snatching up the fallen thug's gun in a single motion. Another shot. She spun behind a metal beam, heart pounding, her grip steady. Emma was low to the ground, covering her head. Safe, for now. Sarah had seconds. The man moved forward, gun raised, eyes scanning for her. You're only making this harder on yourself, he called out. Sarah's lips pressed into a thin line. She needed an advantage. Then she saw it. The rusted chain hanging from the ceiling, attached to a heavy stack of crates. Perfect. She inhaled sharply, aimed, and fired. The bullet snapped through the chain. The crates lurched. The man barely had time to look up before they crashed down on him, knocking him flat with a sickening crack. Silence. Sarah exhaled. She rushed forward, kicking the man's gun away before kneeling beside Emma. Are you hurt? Emma shook her head, her eyes wide but determined. No. What just happened? Don't think about it, Sarah said firmly. We're leaving. Now. She grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her to her feet, moving quickly through the warehouse. The air smelled like oil and dust. Every step echoed. Sarah's mind raced. Langley wouldn't just send 2 men. There could be more. They had to get out fast. But as they reached the exit, she suddenly stopped. Her stomach dropped. A black SUV. And standing next to it, Langley, waiting, smiling, like he already knew how this would end. Sarah pushed Emma slightly behind her, her hand gripping the gun at her side. Langley tilted his head. You're predictable, Agent Carter. I knew you'd come for her. Sarah's jaw clenched. Let her go, Langley. This is between you and me. He laughed. Oh, I know it is. But the problem is, you keep thinking you're the one in control. Sarah stayed silent, calculating. Langley exhaled dramatically. You're good, Carter. I'll give you that. But you don't see the big picture yet. You don't understand how deep this goes. Sarah didn't waver. Then why don't you enlighten me? Langley smirked. You wouldn't like the answer. Sarah shifted slightly, every muscle poised to move. Try me. Langley stepped forward. You've already lost, Carter. You just don't know it yet. Then, the sound of screeching tires. Headlights flooded the scene. A second SUV skidded into the lot. Doors flew open. And suddenly, armed agents stormed out. Langley's smirk vanished. Sarah's heart leaped. FBI. Jake stepped out last, gun drawn. Stand down, he barked. Langley's face hardened. His fingers curled into fists. Sarah's lips curled into a smirk of her own. Now you're the one who didn't see the big picture, she said. Langley's jaw clenched. The game had just flipped. And this time, Sarah was holding all the cards. Langley's smirk was gone. For the first time since Sarah had met him, he looked uncertain, cornered. The FBI agents moved fast, surrounding the black SUV. Guns raised. Orders sharp and clear. Hands where we can see them, Langley. Jake barked. Langley exhaled through his nose, his expression carefully blank. Calculating. Sarah could practically hear the gears turning in his head. He knew this wasn't just a random FBI raid. This was her move. And he hated it. But he was smart enough not to resist. Slowly, he raised his hands. All right. No need to be dramatic. Jake nodded to his agents. Two of them moved in, cuffing Langley's wrists behind his back. Sarah finally let herself breathe. She turned slightly, keeping Emma close. The girl was still shaken, but she was watching everything with wide, sharp eyes. It's over, Sarah murmured. But Emma didn't look relieved. And neither did Sarah. Because Langley wasn't struggling. He wasn't protesting. He was smiling. A slow, knowing smile. Sarah's instinct screamed. Something isn't right. Langley glanced at her. You really think this changes anything, Agent Carter? Sarah didn't answer. Langley chuckled, shaking his head. I almost feel bad for you. Jake grabbed his shoulder. Move. Langley obeyed. But that smile never left his face. Sarah watched them load him into the SUV, the doors slamming shut. And still, something felt off. Her gut twisted. Then, a second SUV, parked near the warehouse, suddenly exploded. The shockwave hit first. The force slammed into Sarah's chest, sending her staggering backward. The blast roared, fire engulfing metal, smoke billowing into the night. Emma screamed. Sarah instinctively grabbed her, pulling her down, shielding her from the debris that rained down around them. Jake was shouting orders. Agents were scrambling. The fire crackled, illuminating the chaos. Sarah's ears rang, her pulse hammering. But through the smoke, she saw it. The FBI SUV. Langley was gone. The cuffs lay discarded on the pavement. Sarah's stomach dropped. It was a setup. Langley had known this would happen. He had planned for it. And now, he was free. Sarah clenched her jaw, rage curling in her chest. This wasn't over. Not even close. The smell of burning metal filled the air. The fire raged behind them, casting flickering shadows across the pavement. Sarah pulled Emma to her feet, scanning the scene. Langley had escaped. He had planned this from the start. Jake was barking orders at his agents, securing the perimeter, calling for emergency backup. His expression was furious as he stormed towards Sarah. He was ready for this, Jake growled. We walked right into it. Sarah exhaled sharply. No, I walked into it. He just waited for me to make my move. Jake cursed under his breath. We need to move now. If he's got an extraction team, he's already disappearing. Sarah's mind raced. Think, Carter. Where would he go? Langley had connections, powerful ones. He didn't need to run in the traditional sense. He just needed to disappear long enough for the heat to die down. And she knew exactly where he would go. The docks, she said suddenly. Jake frowned. What? Sarah turned to him. Langley's real estate empire isn't just about money. It's about moving things off the record. People, supplies. He owns a set of warehouses by the waterfront. If he's escaping, that's his best option. Jake hesitated. You sure? Sarah's jaw tightened. I know how he thinks. And I know he won't risk commercial airports or private airstrips. Not yet. The docks give him a way out tonight. Jake's eyes flicked to the burning wreckage. Then he nodded. All right, let's go. The docks, 40 minutes later. The night air was thick with the scent of salt water and gasoline. The docks were mostly quiet at this hour. Only a few dim floodlights illuminating the massive cargo containers stacked like a steel labyrinth. Sarah, Jake, and a small team of agents moved swiftly, their footsteps muffled by the damp pavement. If he's here, he won't be alone, Jake murmured. Sarah nodded. He's got muscle. But he doesn't know we're coming yet. Her pulse was steady. This was it. If they didn't catch him now, he'd vanish. And if Langley disappeared, she might never get another shot. She tapped her earpiece. Eyes up. If you see movement, call it in first. We do this clean. The team fanned out, weaving between containers, scanning every shadow. Then, a flicker of movement. Sarah's eyes snapped to the left. A figure near one of the larger cargo ships. A man, dressed in black, speaking into an earpiece. And beside him, Langley. Sarah exhaled. Got you. She raised a fist, signaling the team. They moved into position, silent and precise. Jake's voice came through her earpiece. On your go, Carter. Sarah stepped forward, gun raised. Langley, she called out. He turned sharply, and for the first time, Sarah saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Surprise. He didn't expect me to find him this fast. Langley recovered quickly, a smirk curling on his lips. Agent Carter, he said smoothly, you just don't know when to quit, do you? Sarah's grip on her gun tightened. Put your hands where I can see them. Langley sighed dramatically. You know, I had a lot of respect for you. But you just couldn't let this go, could you? Sarah's finger hovered near the trigger. Last warning, Langley. Then, a sharp whistle. From the shadows, men emerged. Armed. Ready. Sarah's jaw clenched. An ambush. Langley laughed. You're predictable, Carter. And that's why you're going to lose. Jake's voice snapped through the comms. We are not backing down. Engage. Then, gunfire. The docks erupted into chaos. Sarah ducked, pressing herself against a shipping container as bullets ripped through the air. She fired back, taking down one of Langley's men before rolling for cover. Emma was crouched behind a crate nearby, her eyes wide with fear. Sarah met her gaze. Stay down. Jake and the FBI agents moved fast, returning fire, pushing Langley's men back. Sarah reloaded, scanning the chaos. Where was Langley? Then she saw him. Running. Coward. She sprinted. Langley weaved through the maze of containers, heading toward a docked speedboat. Sarah pushed harder. Faster. She wasn't letting him get away. Langley reached the edge of the dock, stepping onto the boat. Sarah lunged. She grabbed him by the collar, yanked him backward. Langley crashed onto the wooden dock, gasping in shock. Sarah flipped him onto his stomach, pressing her knee into his back as she snapped the cuffs onto his wrists. Langley struggled. You have no idea what you're doing. Sarah leaned down, her voice ice cold. I know exactly what I'm doing. The gunfire behind them had stopped. Jake's voice came through the comms. All clear. Sarah exhaled sharply. It was over. Langley was done. She stood, yanking him to his feet as FBI agents swarmed in. Langley glared at her. You think you've won? You don't even know the half of it. Sarah held his gaze. We'll see about that. Then she turned, guiding him toward the waiting SUV. The storm was over. But Sarah had a feeling. This fight wasn't finished yet. The sun was beginning to rise over the docks, casting streaks of orange and gold across the water. The flashing red and blue lights of FBI vehicles reflected against the steel containers, cutting through the early morning haze. Sarah stood near the back of an unmarked SUV, watching as Langley was loaded into a transport vehicle. His hands were cuffed behind his back, his perfectly tailored suit now wrinkled and stained with dirt. But what caught Sarah's attention the most was his eyes. Even as he was being taken away, even as everything he had built crumbled around him, he wasn't afraid. He smiled. It wasn't smug anymore. It wasn't the arrogant smirk he had worn in the courtroom. No, this was something worse. It was a promise. This isn't over. Sarah exhaled, forcing herself to focus. It didn't matter. Not right now. Right now, he was in custody. And she had one. Jake walked up beside her, shaking his head. We got enough evidence from his phone to bury him. Offshore accounts, payments to judges, records of illegal deals. Sarah nodded. It's over for him. Jake sighed. I hope so. Sarah glanced at him. You don't think he'll stay locked up? Jake ran a hand through his hair. Guys like Langley? They don't go down easy. He has connections. More than we even know yet. Sarah knew he was right. But that didn't mean she was done. She turned toward Emma, who was standing a few feet away, wrapped in a warm FBI-issued blanket. The girl still looked shaken, but there was something else in her expression now. Hope. Sarah walked over. How are you holding up? Emma gave a small, tired smile. Better now. Sarah nodded. It's over. He can't hurt you anymore. Emma looked up at her. Why did you do all this? You didn't have to. Sarah exhaled. Because you deserved better. Because people like Langley think they can do whatever they want, ruin lives, and get away with it. Emma swallowed. But they don't. Sarah met her gaze. Not when I'm around. Emma smiled. A real smile this time. Jake walked over. FBI's got a protection team ready for her family. We'll make sure they're safe until this is fully wrapped up. Emma's eyes widened. My mom too. Jake nodded. We're taking care of it. Emma blinked rapidly, holding back tears. Thank you. Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're gonna be okay, Emma. You and your family. Emma took a deep breath and nodded. I think, for the first time in a long time, I believe that. Sarah smiled. And just like that, it was over. 1 week later. The trial was already making headlines. Wealthy businessman Robert Langley indicted on federal charges. Judge Malcolm Hayes under investigation for corruption. Langley's empire was crumbling. Sarah watched the news from her small apartment, sipping her coffee. The story was far from finished, but for now, justice had been served. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jake. Langley's officially been denied bail. Thought you'd like to know. Sarah smirked. Good. She set the phone down and leaned back against her chair, exhaling deeply. This job wasn't about glory. It wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about moments like this, knowing she had made a difference, knowing that people like Langley would never walk away unchecked, knowing that Emma and her family were safe. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it settle, and then, just as quickly, she opened them again. Because this wasn't the end. There was always another fight waiting, and she'd be ready. Sarah stood on the steps of the courthouse, the cool breeze carrying the distant hum of the city around her. The weight of everything she had been through settled over her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a quiet victory. Langley was behind bars. His network was collapsing. The corruption that had festered beneath the surface for years was finally being exposed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a clean ending wrapped up with a bow. But it was justice. Emma and her family had been relocated to a safe house while the FBI worked to ensure they wouldn't be targeted again. The girl had been through more than she ever should have, but she was resilient. She would heal. Sarah knew the system wasn't flawless. There would always be another Langley, another corrupt judge, another innocent person caught in the crossfire, but that didn't mean she would ever stop fighting. She reached into her pocket, pulling out her badge and running her fingers over the cold metal. United States Secret Service. Her job wasn't just about protection. It was about doing what was right, standing up when no one else would. She exhaled slowly, then slid the badge back into her pocket. Her phone buzzed. A message from Jake. Another case just came in. You up for it? Sarah smirked, typing back. Always. She took one last look at the courthouse, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the city. The fight for justice never ended, and she wouldn't have it any other way.